Hello there, and welcome to the Charleston Leadership Interviews. I'm Meg White, Senior Consultant with Delta Think and a Director of the Charleston Conference. We sit down today in our latest episode with leaders and innovators who are making a real difference in scholarly publishing, libraries, and the broader information world. Each conversation is a chance to hear firsthand how these decision makers tackle new challenges, rethink traditional models, and collaborate across sectors, as well as we get to know a little bit about the person behind the title. So today we are delighted to welcome Kathleen McEvoy, who is a Senior Policy Fellow with EveryLibrary. Kathleen, welcome to the Leadership Interviews.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're very welcome. We're so glad you're here. So many things to talk about, so many things going on and interesting around libraries, not only in library land, but in the public square. But I'd like to start by going backward to go forward a bit, if we could. Can you tell us a little bit about you and your professional journey? It's been an interesting one, everything from broadcast journalism to your current role as a Senior Policy Fellow at EveryLibrary. Just let us know a little bit about what that journey looks like for you, if you would, please.
Yeah, sure. I was graduated from college with a degree in communications and a degree in political science. And I got into radio, news radio at a small radio station up where I live. I actually met my husband there, so it was fortuitous. And I covered local, state, and national politics. So at one point was working in New Hampshire, which at the time was the first in the nation primary. And so a year out, you had politicians, and New Hampshire is interesting at that point. There's one television station as there is now, a lot of newspapers and a lot of radio stations. And so coming in to cut the spots, we were one of the largest radio stations in one of the biggest cities. And so you would have the politicians and their staff coming in to cut their spots and do interviews. And so it was really this interesting time to learn about broadcasting and be surrounded by this real, that retail politics that makes up the sort of primary season, or used to make up the primary season. And I transitioned to public relations after my children were born, and then started in the library industry in 2005. And, part of learning the business and the industry of libraries, because I was coming from it from a vendor perspective, was really looking at doing this deep dive into what people were saying and learning about the competitors and learning about the different markets. And at one point, I remember saying to myself, am I the only one here seeing this? Like, this seems important. And so I started to share that information with the leadership of the company. And it really became this sort of competitive intelligence wing of what I grew into the communications department. I started just me. And so that was a great way to learn and educate myself. And this was also during the birth of social media. And we had these dramatic changes in how information was being passed, and you had just sort of destruction of traditional media, which was my lifeblood, and the loss of local and competing newspapers and radio stations, even TV stations, and sort of the monopoly that we see today. And so that was really where I got started. And in 2017, there were these accusations of porn in school libraries. And database providers that I worked for, they were being accused of being in league with the sex industry. And what it was said, they said it's part of a strategic marketing campaign to normalize sex work. Which, when you explain something to librarians, they get it, right? But from the outside, that seems scary to people. And so database specific lawsuits, we had interruptions in service. You started to see legislation in 2020, more specific targeting in 2021. And by the 2021-2022 legislative cycle, I was working with lobbyists in one state to defeat a really bad database bill that was specifically targeting the company and really didn't understand databases. And by the next year, legislative cycle, it was 9 states. And during that, though, that 2021, 2022 legislative cycle, that book bannings sort of subsumed or incorporated the database issue. So that's really how I came to this issue. I was introduced to EveryLibrary in 2017. They had helped galvanize librarians in Utah when the databases were shut off there. And what had been this conversation about, hey, how do we show people the value of libraries became, how do we help libraries and their communities who are battling misinformation, about databases and ultimately books. I came onto the EveryLibrary board, which is a 501c4, and then I came on as a senior policy fellow for the EveryLibrary Institute, sort of the think tank 501c3 in 2023.
And, I mentioned in the open how all of a sudden libraries in the last decade have become part of this public discourse, but you were certainly on the front lines of a lot of that, certainly in your former position and now more formally at EveryLibrary. Our listeners may not be as familiar with EveryLibrary, so could you, let's put the spotlight on that for a minute. If you want to give us sort of the elevator pitch, what's an overview of the organization, its mission? Folks may not be as familiar with the work that EveryLibrary does on behalf of libraries here in the U.S.
Sure. So there is the 501c4, which is EveryLibrary, which is a super PAC for libraries. And then you have the EveryLibrary Institute, which is the think tank. EveryLibrary works to support libraries, so it can build local, state, and national support. It can build political support and influence. There's a national voter file, people we can call on when there's an issue. There's a lot of pro bono campaign consulting. 90% of library funding comes from local ballot initiatives, 8% from state and federal, and then 2% from friends and foundations. So EveryLibrary is active on activating voters on election days is a huge part. They'll support or oppose legislation, regardless of the party proposing it. It's all about what's best for libraries. And in the past 13 years, EveryLibrary has insured $2 billion in library funding through their efforts. And then you have the EveryLibrary Institute, which is public education on the role of libraries in American society. There's training for libraries and support on how to advocate, how to raise funding and build support for libraries. And then we do research into those intersecting sort of political issues and libraries where that bulk of that funding comes from.
So it's interesting. In the majority of the Charleston community, we all kinds of libraries, from public through academic and special libraries. But maybe you could talk a little bit about, the advocacy work that you focused on was primarily in the public libraries. How do you see that differentiation, or is there a differentiation between the public libraries that you support and the academic libraries that you support?
In 2023 at ALA, we had a meeting of, it was library deans and directors, it was state librarians, it was consortial heads, it was PEN America at ALA was there, and EveryLibrary as well. And I felt like this sort of Cassandra, because I kept saying, like, they're coming for you, academics. It's just not going to be in the same ways. I would use the term asymmetrical. They're coming for your institutions. And at the time, what I had been seeing through the lobbying efforts was that you had states that were auditing their programs and starting to say, hey, we don't need gender studies, and sociology is woke, and we don't need African American studies. You had this attack on history, if you remember. That was the big, Ron DeSantis was ascendant in Florida, and there were a lot of bills passed that were, you had the takeover of New College. I mean, a lot was going on there. That was in the academic space. And you had DEI programs, you had DEI positions that were being lost. You had this censorship industrial complex. If you remember, there's that weaponization of government subcommittee. And one of the fascinating things about that is I was looking at election interference in 2020 and misinformation and disinformation, as were a lot of other people. And they just sort of flipped it. And they said, no, you people, you government bureaucrats and you social media companies and you researchers who were alerting people to election interference and misinformation online, you're actually the ones who are censoring people. So it was this crazy sort of flip flop. And then you had, I thought, threats to endowments, threats to accreditation, and then this deprofessionalization of librarianship, where you'd have like, there's no longer an MLIS requirement for library directors in certain states. You had this attack on ALA funding. State funds can't be used to fund ALA activities. And so the goal of that meeting was to start to prioritize those issues, bring everyone together, learn more even, and prioritize those issues, and to see what we could start to do to advocate for libraries and raise the alarms within those institutions. And little did I know that June 2023 would be this sort of tipping point, and we would see all of those things and more, and we're still seeing them today.
I'm interested, and of course it's there, but to hear you describe the connection between the change in perspective from the U.S. federal government in terms of higher education, how it immediately trickles into the libraries, not just in terms of funding, but in terms of, I don't want to say softer things, but, the dollars are certainly important, but influencing coverage and collections and materials that are available, how quickly that trickles in, that sort of poison in the well.
Yeah, and then we're not even talking about the threat to scholarly research, right? And the scholarly communication cycle. And so that's what we've seen, right? You have threats to IMLS funding and IMLS itself and research funding and these keywords that you can't use. And then these sort of deals, private deals with institutions instead of, no, this is actually the law and it's for everybody. So this whole research cycle has been under threat. And then I was at Smith College a few months ago talking about the government speech doctrine, which has come out of a library case in Texas. And so the list goes on, and the impacts are really, really far reaching. And I, as part of EveryLibrary, I can use that my communications and my crisis communications and media relations and my political science savvy and government relations experience to help libraries and library professionals and their supporters, as well as, we talk a lot to scholarly publishers as well about the impacts and how you might sort of come around and start to engage on this issue.
It's interesting because it really is a whole new skill set. Librarians are used to, helping expand knowledge, support research, support education, support teaching and learning. But this is a whole new, it's almost a requirement that's layered on top to enable them to fulfill that mission in today's environment.
I trust them though.
No, I never underestimate the power of a librarian. For sure. That if one thing in this industry has taught me that over my 30 years, it's that. So you touched on research in that answer, and EveryLibrary it recently joined the Defend Research Initiative. Could you please talk a little bit about that initiative and why EveryLibrary decided to get involved?
So Defend Research is really, it's fascinating to me because it's so many different people. It's sort of like, I think about, it's that meeting that I had in 2023 and had such great aspirations for, sort of come to life. And I think what we're excited to do is let's start talking about what comes next, because it's great. And I think, Emerald Publishing which is a organization we work with. We have a webinar series with them and really informing people about what's happening. And Defend Research, they're big supporters of Defend Research. And so they sort of brought this to us and introduced us to all the great people there. And so now we're able to have these conversations and really think about what has to come next, because getting everyone and understanding the impact of and the support that's out there is one thing. But I think what every library has learned is turning that into people who can activate, people who can get involved, and also people who can inform us about the things that we don't know about. My experience, even in the academic space, is limited, and always needs more broadening.
So you were in Charleston this year. Just it seems like a long time ago now, but it was just last month. We're taping this in December of 2025. So at the conference this year, you spoke on several panels, and thank you as a director for participating in leading those sessions. But you co-led a pre-conference workshop, Safeguarding Scholarly Communication, a strategic leadership workshop for academic librarians. And you talked a lot about your work in this area with EveryLibrary, but could you share some highlights for folks that maybe were not able to attend the session? Any highlights or takeaways that you maybe had some aha moments during those sessions, particularly regarding strategies for academic libraries in today's climate?
Yeah, I'll talk about all three sessions because I think they all built on one another.
Okay,
So
great.
that was a pre-conference that Emerald sponsored, and Lucy Santos Green from Iowa was really the convener, right? The main. She's somebody who really speaks well and has thought about, speaks well about this issue and has thought about the strategy and has really plotted out how you depoliticize language and how you get to the heart of what is important to your stakeholders. And that's so essential in lobbying. And so it's amazing to me. I see all these like, oh, that's exactly what I would do. That's exactly how you do it. And so she was bringing people through. In addition to talking, there was a lot of workshopping, and so she was bringing people through, like, what's a scenario that you have at your university, and where are the sticking points, and how would you engage in what kind of language would you engage in. And then so when we had Lucy was also part of another session, and she and the other panelists, Lida McCarran and Alex Hodges, we were talking about sort of what do you do in this situation that's really fraught and it's very emotional. Lida's in South Carolina, Alex is at Harvard. They're dealing with some of these issues. And one of the things that Lida talked about is, how do you write a one sheet, for your lobbyists? Do you know who your lobbyists are? Do you know what a one sheet is? And she said, my first one sheet was 3 pages long. And I laughed because I know what a one sheet is. I was like, no, it really does have to be one sheet. And it's just like, who's speaking for me? And that doesn't mean I'm going to go and advocate. It means I want to make sure they have the best information about the library so that when they're speaking about the library, they can really speak about those, they have the information they need. I had a great example from the lobbying effort that I did about the power of anecdotes and storytelling, where in one state there was a really, really bad bill that had databases in it. And there was no way to defeat this bill. It was just going like a freight train. But the lobbyist that we were working with got a meeting with the woman who was in charge of the bill. And she told him, I'll meet with you, but I'm not opening up this bill. It's a huge bill. It's closed. I'm not opening it up. And when he went in there, he saw pictures of her children. And he remembered an anecdote from another lobbyist in another state when we were talking about how a librarian got up there and explained, if this bill passes, every student will need to have a username and password, including kindergartners. And that's going to be the whole library session, right? Just the practicalities of it, the unintended consequences. Mm-hmm. And when he saw that picture, it reminded him of that story. He told her that story, and she said, that won't work. And she opened up the bill, and she changed it. And so that's the power of knowing enough information about libraries. And so the library's job, the library professional's job, is to make sure that that information is shared. And then in the third session was with Tony Roche of Emerald and Gary Price, who I just rely on for so much information. He's wonderful. And it was about, I had this sort of, this my 20% of an idea, which I actually had thrown out at Charleston in between. And I said, listen, I don't have the whole story, but here's 20% of an idea. If we're in a situation where sort of everything's being attacked and everything's being torn down, what would we save? What would we do over? What would we avoid? Who would be standing in our way? Who would we need to pull in? And so it's those kinds of conversations that were really interesting to have, because you're trying to build something maybe from nothing, or maybe from sort of the wreckage of whatever's left over here. And why don't we do it better?
Right. And out of those 3 sessions, the one that I was able to attend was that last one, 20% of the solution. And for the folks who have access, please do log into that one. I can speak to. It was fantastic. Typical Charleston, very interactive. Lots of good discourse between the panelists who you mentioned and the audience. So yeah, I thought that was really fruitful and just a gateway to thinking about what this looks like moving forward. How do we put those pieces together in ways that stay true to the North Star, right? Stay true to that mission of expanding access to information, of which libraries are such a crucial part. So, and other stakeholders at Charleston for sure. But the majority of our attendees are librarians who are doing this important work. So let's look to the future, if you wouldn't mind. And this is more just your opinion and your vision. How do you see the role of library advocacy evolving in response to some of these challenges we've talked about? And what should library professionals be prepared for in the future?
I think there are some issues that are coming up or are here that we need to be thinking about. First of all, I think accreditation, university accreditation, the model that's changing, the sort of pressure from the current administration to introduce new accreditors or to have curriculum changes tied to accreditation. Sort of this is sort of game. And there's this exclusion of libraries that we've started to see. I don't know if you remember, but Western Illinois University let go of its library staff,
Yes.
the bulk of its staff. And when we looked at that, it was, well, who's their accreditor? And we looked up the accrediting standards, and libraries were just crossed out from one set of standards to the new set of standards. And so we started talking to legislators in Illinois about that. And so that conversation is sort of percolated. And then here in Massachusetts, we just had a call to arms in October when the New England Commission on Higher Education proposed its new standards. And in 2016, NECHI had gone from 11 library-related standards to 8, and then they split those standards into different groups, so IT standards and curriculum standards. And then the proposed 2026 standards talked about academic staff and sufficient staff, but it didn't talk specifically about libraries. And NECHI had some research that was done by librarians, academic librarians, showing that when library standards, library-specific standards were reduced in 2016, librarians were reported that they were left off evaluation committees when their universities were going through accreditation, which is really, really dangerous, right? Mm-hmm. Because you don't have that voice. You can't get that one sheet to the right person, or you're not in the meeting. You don't know what's happening. And so, it was really gratifying to see that we had so much response from libraries and consortia that they actually, NECHI had a library day of listening, and they maxed out their Zoom, sort of crashed at 300 because that's all the people they allowed in. But now, it's one step forward, 2 steps back. Right now, they're about to vote on their standards, and their libraries are not in there. So what do we do now? We start looking at what are the other accrediting bodies? When is the timetable for accreditation at your university? Do you know the liaison for your university on the administration side to your accreditor? And are you able to make the case? Do you have programs that require libraries, and how is that going to impact them? Nursing is that it's a standard. Their accrediting standards for nursing require libraries. So how do you make up that difference if your university doesn't? Maybe in the data form sheet it lists libraries, but they're not in the narrative, and being part of the narrative is what's important. And so then obviously, you have what's just happened with the deprofessionalization of a lot of um, majors, nursing being one of them, and this sort of threshold of you have to first year nurse or even librarian, there are some library programs that don't match the threshold, need to meet a threshold for somebody who doesn't go to college if they want to secure student loans. So it really is going to have a huge impact on a lot of programs around the country.
Do you know what's so interesting? That was shocking to me. My background is health sciences in the industry, and there already is a nursing shortage in this country. And this just some numbers. And part of the problem why there's a nursing shortage is there's not enough nursing faculty. Nursing schools routinely now turn away qualified applicants because they don't have enough faculty to teach. So the impact in that profession alone, and it reaches out into physical therapy, occupational therapy. It also will have impact on medical students as well. And I pay attention to all of that, but it is far reaching. And you've just mentioned another tentacle of that connected to the accreditation. I love your advice though. Be aware on your campus, yet another thing on the to-do list for the librarians listening, but
yeah, and I would also say, because I forgot to mention, like, who are the other departments on campus who have also been removed? Because that's an ally, right? And so really, even in the larger framework of advocacy, who are your natural allies? Who is being impacted as well? And start to make sure you have those relationships. Do you have a senator or congressman who is a staffer who is a graduate? Are you reaching out or do they have the one sheet, right? Like, who are you reaching out to who can speak for libraries if you can't speak for yourself?
And are there resources on the EveryLibrary website that could help folks? Like, I'm thinking like, okay, how can I get involved? How can I get started? What would you recommend for folks who are listening to the conversation?
Yeah, definitely on the EveryLibrary and the EveryLibrary Institute website. There's also the Political Librarian, which is our journal. We have a Medium channel that has a lot of blog posts. And so there's a lot of information, position papers as well. So the website's really a resource. And then in your own state, if you're looking to see who's out there, what are people doing, fightforthefirst.org is a platform that is an EveryLibrary platform that allows for petition drives, and it allows for the formation of freedom to read foundations and library alliances. And so joining those is another option, and understanding where those exist in your state might be helpful to you as well.
Okay. This is just incredible and a great perspective for some of our folks who are listening in, especially the librarians who are focused on libraries and librarianship. This is a whole nother perspective that is critically important for them to understand and to know about. So we're grateful for you participating at Charleston and for sharing your time today. We started out talking a little bit about you. I'd like to end talking a little bit about you and just fascinating conversation about your work, but we're talking about knowledge and libraries. What do you like to read in your spare time when you're just Kathleen and not Kathleen with your professional cap on?
Yeah, it's hard to separate. I do read a lot of nonfiction about technology and politics and communications and hostage negotiations and cults and I just am fascinated by how people communicate and especially in tense situations. And then if I'm reading fiction, it's like I just have to, it's total escapism. It's political thrillers and mysteries. I started when I was a kid reading Robert Ludlum. I can still remember the Parsifal Mosaic.
I love Robert Ludlum. Yes, the Parsifal Mosaic. Oh, fantastic.
One of my favorites. And so I read, that's like the two things. So I just finished for nonfiction, Empire of AI by Karen Ho. And then I just finished for fiction Michael Connelly's Nightshade, which is his newest. And there are certain authors I read as soon as they come out. And then I'm just starting Locust Lane, which is Stephen Amadon's new book. And he had me at Massachusetts, which is where I live, in murder. I'm on it.
Okay. Kathleen, is advocacy, Massachusetts, and murder are your three descriptors for our conversation.
Communications, rhetoric. I got to figure it all out. I'm trying to crack the nut of how we talk to one another about things.
Anyway, well, thank you so much again for your support of Charleston and for sharing some of your time with us today. It's a fascinating, Charleston was sailing into the wind this year, and certainly, there are lots of challenges out there for libraries and librarianship, but we've got lots of tools to be able to help us change the direction maybe and sail into that wind successfully. So you're a big part of that, and every library is certainly a big part of that. So we're thankful for that.
Thank you so much.
All right. Happy holidays. And we will sign off now. And thanks everyone for joining us. Kathleen McEvoy from EveryLibrary here on the Charleston Leadership Interviews. Take good care.